But first, the defection from the Greens of Senator Lydia Thorpe was so much more than your stock standard act of political betrayal. It's provided a window into the real agenda behind the proposed voice, which is much more about sovereignty than just about recognition and consultation. The Prime Minister keeps saying that the voice is merely a modest but meaningful change, about being polite, about good manners.
Because this is about progress going forward. It is about reconciliation. It's not a radical proposition. Where matters affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they should be consulted. That's just good manners, Erin. It's just good manners. Ensure that they'll be consulted and be able to put forward a view on policies that impact them. That's not only good manners, it will lead to better outcomes. It's also about how the world sees Australia as well. Whether we're a mature nation that's able to reconcile and move forward. It is a generous, modest and gracious offer.
Softly, softly, don't scare the horses. But what the Prime Minister doesn't say is that the voice is just one element in the demands of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, to which he and his government are fully committed. A reminder, here he was on election night.
Together, we can embrace the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We can answer its patient, gracious call for a voice enshrined in our Constitution. Because all of us ought to be proud that amongst our great multicultural society, we count the oldest living continuous culture in the world.
And again, as recently as the weekend, talking to the Chifley Research Centre.
And I, of course, am proud to lead a government committed to the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
So he quotes it a lot. Let's remind ourselves of what the Statement from the Heart actually says. It says our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent. Now it goes on, this sovereignty has never been ceded or extinguished. So says this Statement of the Heart. Reminder, the government's fully and absolutely committed to all tranches of it. The statement wants Aboriginal people then to take their rightful place in our country. And the signatories, of course, don't just want a voice enshrined in the Constitution. They want what they, quote, call a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making, that's treaties, between governments and First Nations people, and this truth-telling about Australia's history. In other words, treaties between supposedly sovereign Indigenous nations and the government and people of Australia. The argument between Lydia Thorpe and the Greens is about means, not ends. It's about what comes first, the voice or the treaties. Thorpe says that accepting the voice prejudices the call for sovereignty. Now, the rest of the Greens say that the voice is just the first step towards treaties that will eventually enshrine sovereignty. Indeed, yesterday, that's exactly what Adam Bandt, the Greens leader, said, that he's supporting the voice because, and I quote, he'd received guarantees from the government on sovereignty and funding to progress treaty and truth. Or as Labor's Senator Malarndirri McCarthy said to the NITV on January 31, I'm from the Gulf of Carpentaria, we've never ceded sovereignty, and do you think I'd stand by and let that happen? Have a look.
And in terms of sovereignty, well, we have said on numerous occasions, even as recent as the Senate estimates through the Attorney General's office, that sovereignty in terms of the voice, of course First Nations people will not cede sovereignty. I'm a Yanyuwagaro woman from the Gulf of Carpentaria. We've never ceded sovereignty. And do you think I'd stand by and let that happen? No way.
Or as Labor's Senator Pat Dodson also said to the Chifley Conference on the weekend, the voice would be the start of a reconciliation process that would then go on to treaty and truth-telling. And as we heard from him yesterday, a seat for them too at the National Cabinet. So what precisely are the guarantees the government's given the Greens on sovereignty, on treaty and on truth? And what promises have been made to Aboriginal leaders such as Dodson? Now, these are the questions the Prime Minister dances around because he knows that if he answers them in a way that would satisfy the Green left, he'll reveal to voters that this voice is a Trojan horse that will change Australia forever. This is what's really at stake in this voice debate. Who's in charge and who really will run Australia? Is it the Parliament elected by 25 million of us? Or is it the elected Parliament, but only provided the 800 or so Indigenous people represented by the voice don't object to the broader views of everyone else? Or is it the Aboriginal people who reckon they've never ceded sovereignty and who might tolerate the presence of the rest of us, but only if we pay some sort of reparation for our illegal occupation of their Indigenous land? For instance, this black sovereign movement that Senator Thorpe now says she represents wants every homeowner to pay 1% of his or her wage to the relevant Indigenous body as a tax or a rent to the black people who she says are really sovereign and should probably be in charge of what's now called Australia. Let's be under no illusion about what this voice will inevitably mean should it come to pass. It'll mean demands, of course, to change the date of Australia Day. It'll mean demands to rewrite Australian history. It will mean demands for treaties between our country and small groups of our citizens. And ultimately, it'll mean demands for more payments from all Australians to Aboriginal Australians, on top of the $30 billion per annum that the Productivity Commission estimates is now spent on Aboriginal affairs. It didn't surprise me that the Greens leader was so careful not to antagonise Thorpe yesterday, because he doesn't want her merely tactical opposition to the voice to jeopardise its achievement, which is so central to the Greens left's agenda to radically remake Australia. Both Ban and Thorpe are chasing the same thing. He just sees it happening via the voice as a first step, whereas she wants to cut out the middlemen, so to speak, and move straight to a treaty, and beyond, of course, to co-governance and indeed a new and separate Aboriginal country. But what Thorpe has done now, by blowing up this issue yesterday, will hopefully shake the rest of us out of our complacency. The voice is not just about being polite and respectful to Aboriginal people. Far from it. It's about whether Australia belongs to all of us or just some of us, with most of us being barely tolerated as interlopers, despite the contribution all of us have made to this country and those who have come before us, regardless of our skin colour.